everyone, and welcome to Growing Kentucky's Leaders. I'm one of your hosts, Sheldon McKinney.
And I'm your other host, Ruth Ann Fink.
And today we have just one of my favorites, Matt Chaliff, the Kentucky FFA Executive Secretary. He is truly the one who keeps it all together for Kentucky FFA. He has served in his role for the last 20 years, an ag teacher before that, and he has mentored the last 2 decades of Kentucky FFA state officers. So his leadership has helped shape Kentucky agriculture and Kentucky ag ed for the past 20 years. And he's also the keeper of our history. He's seen FFA from all sides, including right now, as he is the parent of 2 Kentucky FFA members. So, Mr. Chaliff, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want folks to get to know who you are, but let's start by you just telling us, how did your lifelong journey with FFA begin, and a bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Rockcastle County. My grandparents had a small farm. My parents did not farm. And it came time to pick high school classes, and I was trying to figure out what to do. And my dad said, you need an easy class, you should take ag. And so that's ultimately how the journey started. I didn't have any negative thoughts about ag, but they didn't do a real good job recruiting or anything. And so I was like, it's fine. But I jumped in, and Mr. Bill Ponder was my freshman teacher. And I had a really great experience. I found my place and my people, all those things that are so cliche, but it really was true for me. I'd never fit in anywhere. And then suddenly it's like, these are my people. So I got involved and very active through high school. Had a chance to serve as a state officer in 97, 98. Went on to UK and got a degree in ag education, and student taught with Gary Burdine at Jessamine County. And then I got hired at Taylor County, and I taught at Taylor County for from 2000 to 2004. And then that summer of 2004, this job came open, and I applied, and I went to Frankfurt in the fall of September the 16th, 2004. I went to Frankfurt.
Mm-hmm.
So FFA was just this unexpected thing in my life. I didn't know I needed, but it became such a huge part of who I am and where I am, and the opportunities I've had, the people I've gotten to work with and know. So it's really been special to me for doing the math, I guess 31 years. It's been the thing in the middle of my life, which is really special.
It is special. And I want to share, I was a state FFA officer in 2005, 2006, and I was not your first group of officers, but your first group you had gotten to work with
first
from day one.
Team.
Yeah, on. And we had so much fun. I look back over that of how our training has changed from then to now. But who you are has always been the same. It's grown. I appreciate your mentorship so much. It's wild to think about.
Well, we say this to first-year teachers, but it's true for first-year state staff too.
Mm-hmm.
You learn about as much from the students as they learn from you. And so for those first few officer teams, that I learned way more from them than they learned from me. But certainly you and people like you, Sheldon, contributed to who I am and how I approach state officers, all the way to this day. So it's a lot of great memories of you and your team, but all the teams down through the years. And it's funny how different teams contribute to what FFA is and how it's changed. And a lot of it is gradual changes, but we look back and we're like, we're doing this so much different, so much better than we ever dreamed of in 2005. And it's because people all through the years have said, we should fix this. We need this. What if we did X? And it's really helped us grow and develop the state officer program. So I'm really proud of that progress and that change that's taken place over that time period.
Yeah, you should be. I don't know if you keep account, but you have been to so many state officer weddings and maybe even baby showers. It's more than just a year of their lives. In that role in mentorship. You really are a mentor to them for a long time.
It's somebody the other day was talking about weddings, and I said, if somebody invites you to your wedding, you try to go because they thought enough of you to invite you to their wedding. And so, yeah, that's been really special to get to do that and watch kids grow up on Facebook and that sort of thing. And so, my first state officer grandchildren will be Mason Hobbs. I assume he'll be a freshman next year at Meade County. And then I don't know if Avery Gaddy will do ag and FFA or not, but Avery and Mason will both be freshmen next year. So that's a good way to make you feel old. But in terms of being a part of people's lives over a long period of time, that's kind of crazy to think about.
It is really special. And so many things evolve too. And I wanted to ask you, Mr. Chaliff, just, looking back at your career in this landscape of agriculture education in Kentucky, so much has changed over the years since you started in 2004 in this role. What are a few changes that you have seen that have positively impacted the mission of Kentucky FFA?
Well, I think, obviously all the changes that have been good have been driven by teachers and teachers doing good stuff for good reasons. Kentucky was very early on the CASE, the Curriculum for Ag Science Education train. Back around the time I started, Kurt Lucas was sort of an early leader in that nationwide. Um, and I think that whole program and all the work around CASE really pushed all of our teachers to be more inquiry based. And even people that weren't CASE certified were getting that push to let's have labs, let's have hands on things, even for things that you can't go out to the shop and do, but you can, do ear notching pigs with bologna or something crazy like that. But it gave students the hands on. And I think that focus on hands on that Ag Ed has kept, maybe it's not new, Ruth Ann, but we've renewed our focus on it, I think, during that
Mhm.
time. That's been really, really valuable. Um, Ag teachers have been really quick to adopt technology, which sounds crazy because we're not exactly a techie group. We don't have that feel. But ag teachers have really been leaders in adopting, Google Suite and other online technology um, to do things and do it well. And ag teachers have been very open to. I think ag teachers are so practical. They always say, "How can we do this better? How can we do it
Mhm.
easier?" And if you say, "Hey, by doing an online survey, we can take paperwork out of your hands, paperwork out of our hands," and they say, "Yes, sign us up." And so ag teachers have been very open to making changes that made sense for students and made sense for the program. So all credit for good things goes to ag teachers because they've ultimately been the ones in the classrooms doing that and making that stuff happen.
Yeah, ag teachers are very adaptable, and the world of education changes quickly. And if you're not hopping on that train of change, then you really are getting left behind. I think that's very true to say. And the landscape of how students learn has changed, and what
It's
keeps them involved. And that's a testament to why Kentucky FFA is growing and growing and growing in membership, is they want to be a part of that.
I think I think if you think about education, it's very much a pendulum. Things swing, things that were
Hmm.
important in 2004 went out of style. Now they're coming back in style. Um, Education, when I started this job, our big focus was rigor, relevance, and relationships. We've been through 4 or 5 iterations of that. But you know what that really is? It's good classroom instruction, work-based learning, leadership development, which is what IGED's been doing for 100 years. And so we've we've done a good job of adapting those things and changing those things and staying current. But at the bedrock for 100 plus years, IGED has been saying we should have really good classrooms with hands-on instruction. And you know what? If you go to a college of education today and say, what's the latest research show? It says you should have really good instruction with hands-on instruction. And you should be telling them why it's important and you should be giving them chances to experience it and apply it. And so we have done a great job adapting, but somehow staying true to those principles. And I think that's really the key to success is to do the right things for the right reasons, but you do have to dress it up and change it and
Mhm.
make it relevant for the next group of students because it's what your grandfather learned, Ruth Ann, is very different from what your
Mhm.
son is going to learn someday and need to learn
Yeah.
and how they learn, but the basic concepts are the same.
Yes, speaking of my grandfather, he used to always say his favorite thing in FFA, which he was born in the 40s, was the pest control management.
Sure.
CD, and they would have to bring in a foot or a tail of different rodents or pests, and they would get points for it throughout the year. And whoever won at the end of the school year got a shotgun. So things have changed in how we are teaching different concepts of agriculture to our
I love that.
students.
For sure.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't quite understand. It was collecting like who got the most
Oh
rodents.
yes, he
That
said they
was
had a
that.
board in the
Okay.
classroom.
Yeah.
They'd have to bring in
Well,
a foot or a tail.
and you got more points for certain, a rat tail was not worth as much maybe as a
Sure.
skunk tail or whatever. There were I think when I was a state officer, there were still a few chapters probably that did that. I think that died in probably did not go away totally till the early 2000s. But yeah, that was real common in the
Mm-hmm.
50s and 60s, I think, but it held on for a long time.
Yeah. So what we do doesn't really change. How we do it does to meet those next generation of students, and it's constantly evolving. I want to take a moment to ask you about the three circle model. And I'm thinking about this past year of the podcast. I don't think anybody's ever talked about the three circle model that Ag Ed is built on. But when you go talk to new teachers or people go, what is Ag Ed and what is this thing you all are talking about? Give us just a brief overview of how that should work in every FFA chapter.
Sure. The idea with the three circle model is we start with good classroom instruction, and then so that's one component of the AGED model is good classroom instruction, lab instruction, those pieces. The next circle is FFA. The next circle is work-based learning or supervised ag experience, as we would tend to call it. The idea is those circles need to overlap. And so, for example, my example I use over and over is ag sales, but we teach the ag sales content in class. We teach students how to sell a product, the steps in the sales process, how to do customer service, all those pieces. And then that leads to you having a local contest to pick your ag sales team. And then that team goes on and they represent you at the regional contest and FFA. And then hopefully a student uses those skills they learned in a job someday. And maybe they get a job at Tractor Supply or Southern States or wherever. And they use those sales skills in that job. And so that's where the circles really have a lot of overlap. And so the idea is that all we do with FFA grows out of the classroom. And what that does, it has several advantages for the teacher. It means you're not teaching your ag sales team after school, you're teaching them during the school day. They're getting what they need to be successful in that contest during the school day, but they're learning something valuable too. But it also leads to students being motivated. And so we've got a student back in the back of the classroom that really doesn't care about school, really doesn't care about anything. But we say, you have a chance to go to the regional contest, or you can use this to get a job. And we ultimately get them motivated. They're bought in. They're excited about what's going on at school. And maybe, and this is true, this happens. We may change that student's life or their whole family's trajectory because we got them engaged. And it's not that they went to the regional contest and won. Where we change their life is they get a job and they become the first generation in their family that has a career and not a job or is, productively employed and that sort of thing. And so it really, when it works together, it's kind of amazing. And the diagram we use now has the colors bleed over each other. So the blue and the yellow make green and that sort of thing. But that's really where we make an impact in a student's life. It's where those circles are overlapping and what they're learning in class applies to their work-based learning and gives them some opportunities for recognition at FFA. So when that all works together, it's really, really special. And we do make a lifelong difference in the lives of students.
It does. And we don't just do that. It's not rare for that to happen. Because of this podcast and the foundation, we've just heard stories and stories and stories of this is how I found my path. And we're still doing it. So important.
Absolutely.
I want to ask about how you manage state FFA officers. I've gotten to sit through your training many times. As the executive secretary, you are the keeper of our state officer team and those expectations that we ask them to present to all Kentucky FFA members. So I want you to share. I've heard lots of rumors over the years of all the things you have to do when you become a state officer. But what are kind of your to-do list of expectations that you immediately share with state FFA officers that might be applicable to local chapter officers and how they should present themselves?
I think we start with, you are the brand. You are the image of FFA for 23,000 members across the state, for sponsors, for past members. And so it's really important that you look like you're the brand. So we talk to guys about fresh haircuts and a clean shave, and those are things that go all the way back to Delmer Dalton in the 70s. But that still matters today. But we talk about professional appearance and grooming. We talk about good communication. If you're going to an event, you need to know what the expectation is, how you're supposed to dress. We talk about preparation. Ultimately, preparation is what shows. And so, if you're going to give a speech, you should know that speech forward and backward. And because you've done the communication, you know the audience and you know who you're speaking to, and you really go and give them a great experience. Um, and then while you're there, you take time to interact with those members. I think the thing that people miss, state officers miss, and adults miss is how much people appreciate a personal interaction. And it may be a 1 minute interaction, but to you as the state officer, or you as the teacher, or you as the foundation director, you're like, that was 1 minute. But to that person, it's like the state president stopped and talked to me for 1 minute. And that, I don't want to oversell that, but that can be life changing for a student. And so I think trying to get them to see that, how much value there is in those 1 and 2 and 3 minute interactions, and making time for those. And we can only do those, chapter officers or state officers. You can only do that when you're prepared and have your act together so that you have enough time to do that, enough headspace. So I think those things really have value and meaning to students. So we just try to train state officers to do that and do it well, and show up and do a great job. I think one of the challenges for state officers, that sometimes is a challenge for local officers too, is you bring together this group of really talented people, and you say, for state officers particularly, we bring 12 of the best together and we say, okay, you've all got to work together.
Yeah.
And everybody's got to find their spot. And maybe at my chapter, I've been all things to all people, but now I'm not. But what happens is state officers start to say, wait a minute, I'm really good at organization. And you're saying I can just do organization and I can be really effective and my team can be really effective. It's life changing. And I think a lot of local officer teams would do well to figure that out and say, okay, my strength is this. Let me operate in my strength. And I'm going to stay out of your lane and you stay out of my lane, and let's work together for the good of everybody. And I think we do that well as a state staff. There's certain things I'm really good at. My spiritual gift is nagging, I think. But I've been told that a few times. But I play a different role than you play, or than Miss Wright plays, or than Josh Mitchum plays. But because we all do our roles and do it well and operate in our strengths, we're very effective. And I think state officers have to figure that out, but chapter officers too. But if I'm operating my strength, we're ultimately more effective and do a lot better. So.
And honestly,
Yes.
the relief that comes when you get to operate in your strength instead of reaching to do things you really struggle with. When if you can just
Absolutely.
relinquish that to somebody else, it's so good.
Yeah, there's a difference in stretching to do things that are a little outside your comfort zone, and reaching to the point where you're, hurting yourself or about to fall off the ladder. And so I think you've got to figure that out. Sometimes you do need to stretch, but a lot of times you need to let the other person do what they're good at, and you do what you're good at, and everybody's better off.
And if we have chapters listening and they're like wondering, how do I get started doing this? There's so many tools out there that are free, that chapter officer teams could do together at some point. All those personality tests, there's tons of them. And that's really what the state officers do. They go through training when they're first elected, and they get to see where those strengths are and how they can blend best together as a team. It takes time. For sure. It does take time. It does not happen quickly for them to figure that out, but it's so worth it. And when they do figure it out and they're starting to gel, those are the teams that really perform well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
One other thought I want to follow up on with that, when you're talking about preparedness for state officers and looking your best and some of those things, I think it's easy to be a person who's like, I'm so easygoing. I'm not going to prepare. I'm just going to go with the flow. And though there are some good things about going with the flow and being adaptable, I love when a student gets to experience for the first time. I have worked very hard to prepare. I am prepared to go do what you have asked me to do. I'm like looking my best. I've taken my time to be my best, and I'm going to walk in that confidence that I'm prepared instead of scrambling. And I think once you are expected to this is the standard, is to do your best all the time. Operating in that scrambled way, it becomes foreign to you. It just
Right.
feels so much better to get to walk through life feeling prepared.
Oh, for sure. And the thing about, you want to be prepared to the point that the audience doesn't have to know how prepared you are. It's great if you're so prepared that you look like you're winging it, but you can't wing anything well. You have to be really prepared and do it well. And even things like, I know you do this, Sheldon, but if you're going on a sponsor visit, you look up some of those key people and key things and key facts before you go. Now you make it look like you just magically knew it, but things like that. And I don't think maybe FFA members realize how big a deal that is. But if you're going to a Capitol visit, for example, if you can do just a little bit of Facebook snooping on your state representative and know that they have a daughter who plays soccer and a son who plays tennis and whatever, that can make that visit much better and much more valuable. And it's just a little preparation, but it makes you feel more comfortable and you perform at your best level. And it really but then it pays so much dividend in that 5 minutes. It's not that you have to know their whole life history, but the same thing is true for a speech or workshop or presentation. Just that little bit of preparation can go so far in making it a better experience for everybody.
Absolutely. Okay, Mr. Call, if I have to brag on you, and you're not going to be happy with me for doing this, but if you are just listening in, I'm currently holding up Mr. Call's book. He is literally an author. We have to talk about this on this podcast. If you don't know Mr. Call, he is a keeper of history, especially for Kentucky FFA, and has wrote a book on the history of Kentucky FFA. And that's such a special skill that you hold for Kentucky and our staff. It takes, speaking of a lot of planning and time, that takes a lot of planning and time to keep that archive. And it's a special thing to get to look back on. I know in my role, I keep this book handy. You probably saw I have Post-it notes that we use for some of our different like stewardship pieces with our donors. It's important. It's important information to have as an organization. So where did your love of history come from? Why did you start this project? And then I do want to talk about how can local chapters start this if they are inspired and want to do the same thing?
So I've always liked history. I guess I've just always liked old people. My grandparents were really special to me. And so they would tell, my grandparents were the kind of people that told you about people who were dead and things that had happened 50, 60 years ago. Like I talk about World War II like I lived through it because that's how my grandparents talked about it. Um, and so as I, got involved in FFA, older people would tell me things, and especially when I took this job, um, Mr. Dalton would tell me things, or James Maddox, who was one of the former camp directors, would take us to lunch and he would tell us things, and Charles Wade, who was a former state staff member. And all these people, the history just kind of found me. I guess I would listen. And so these people would tell me things and share things. And I kept just cramming it in a folder and cramming it in a folder. And then we did a project, probably it's been 10 or 12 years ago, but it was, we were researching past state officers and past national officers, particularly because we brought a bunch of past national officers back to convention. And so again, I got all these snippets and people's scrapbooks, and uh, Julian Pierce's daughter had never heard of me before and let me come to her house and take pictures of her dad's scrapbooks and stuff like that. And so I had all this stuff, and I kept thinking, if something happens to me, nobody even knows how to put this together or what it means. And so I started trying to get it in one, at least in one document. And then during COVID, I had extra time. And so I really said, this has just got to happen. We've got to pull it together. We had literally boxes of photographs at FFA camp that were in the attic, molding and mildewing. And Jenna Burke, bless her heart, she scanned hundreds of pictures and captioned them and things like that. And so a lot of different things worked together to make all this possible. But that's kind of how the book came about. And of course, as you worked in the book, then you said, here's a gap. So I've got to go track down this piece of it. Some people, Sheldon Charles Berry, entrusted me with the Fleming County history books that went back literally the 1920s. And he's like, I want you to hang on to these and use them. And you promise me they'll be okay. And I'm, yes, Mr. Berry, they'll be okay.
Mhm.
And so different people have contributed to that. I can't take all I've done is compile it and get it in one place and kind of have a common story. But yeah, that was been fun to be part of. Um, as far as how chapters can do that, number one, I think chapters really do need to do it.
Yeah.
They people who that a lot of the people that helped me a bunch with this are no longer with us, and we missed on national officers. The first national officer from Kentucky, like I tracked down his family like a year too late. If we had like there was 5 or 6 years there, I could have literally talked to him, and we didn't. And what a shame. And so I think chapters, the sooner they start, the better. Just talking to people in the community and getting a history. Um, a lot of these scrapbooks are, sitting on shelves and they're not getting any
Mhm.
better. And so, how do we scan those? How do we get pictures electronically and get captions on them? But to capture that local history, because there's so much local history out there, for almost 100 years of FFA, and we need to capture it. And that would be a great project for
Mhm.
classes and people to get involved in. And I hope that's one thing that we really push toward as we get to our 100th anniversary, is that local chapters do a good job capturing their history and then keeping up with it. Here's the thing:
Yeah.
things that happened when I started in this job are 20 years ago, but now that's part of the history. And so, I've tried to approach it as whoever follows me, I want them to say, Matt Calliff's records I can find and we can track our history for those years. So I think advisors ought to probably do a better job of that too.
And some simple tools I think to share. We have a Flickr page, a public Flickr page. Kentucky FFA does. The photos that are on Flickr are accessible to anybody, but your chapter could start a Flickr page that can be passed on and save those photos. We used to do interviews in front of a camera with people to get their testimonies on camera, and we had to have a camera person and lighting and all these places. You don't have to do that anymore. You can
Right.
open up your computer, hit record, use a little mic, and get testimonials and load them up on YouTube. They can be accessible for all those
Absolutely.
things. But, I think about Jonathan Shell, our ag commissioner. He was state star in 2005. And I don't think he has a good picture of that moment. And he's asked us, like, do you have this picture? We don't
Mm.
have that picture that
I
we can
know. I
find,
know.
and so those things are now that photos can be stored digitally, they don't have to go in a scrapbook, in a box, in an attic. We can do better at preserving that history for many years to come. I think that's a great charge for local chapters.
For sure. For sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, it really is but I look back, I have about 5 pictures of me in official dress.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
that, they were taken with a probably a disposable 35 millimeter camera,
Yep.
and
Mhm.
some of them aren't really good, but it's what I've got. And so I think, but there are also pictures out there. There's a picture I had never seen of me before in official dress, was in a local scrapbook, and somebody sent it to me about a year ago, and it's probably the one of the better ones there is. And so there's lots of pictures out there, whether they're in chapter scrapbooks or grandma's attic. But if we could get that all together, it would be really amazing.
Mhm.
As you were compiling this book and hearing all the stories and scanning all the photos, were there any stories that were unearthed that just still stick with you?
Lots. So I'll share a couple. Rupert Seals was New Farmers of America national president from Fayette County. His dad was principal of the black high school, and he made exactly half as much as the principal of the white high school. Um, and so, and Dr. Seals, his name is Rupert Grant Seals, and he's named after his grandfather, who was named after Ulysses S. Grant when he was born in 1864. This man's grandfather was born a slave and named after Ulysses S. Grant because Grant was going to,
Yeah.
save them. Um, that was a kind of
Hmm.
a crazy moment. Um,
And to
We've been
stop there about Rupert Seals and just our history with New Farmers of America, Kentucky had maybe some of the most successful New Farmers of America chapters. We had so many national officers who were New Farmers of America, a rich, rich history.
We did. And unfortunately, a lot of that history is gone. We were able, through Robbie Alexander, connected us with the Hopkinsville Christian County Museum, and they had some yearbooks from the Hopkinsville Addicts chapter that had some of the best New Farmers pictures in them. That was mostly from the 60s. Um, but unfortunately, when desegregation happened and schools consolidated, a lot of records and files and stuff just got dumped in dumpsters or put in a box in somebody's attic and got thrown away. And so, if anybody's listening that has New Farmers of America information for Kentucky, please give me a call. I would love to talk to you. But we've been lucky to get the information that we have, but there's been a lot of that that's been um, sort of lost along the wayside, and it really is a shame. But we did have some really successful folks and very active in that. We had, I think, 3 national presidents of NFA over a period of about 30 years, which is, or really over a period of 20 years, which is really tells you how active Kentucky was in that.
Yeah.
My other story that has always stuck with me is our first female state officer, Pam Brinkley from Madisonville. Her dad was an ag teacher, but Mr. Dalton and her dad were so worried about her as a female traveling by herself that she had this huge stuffed animal. And they made her, when she would go to a chapter banquet, she had to buckle the stuffed animal in the passenger seat of her car. So after dark, people would think there was somebody else in the car with her. And that's
I
in,
don't think I've heard this.
I think that's like 1979. So that's 45 years ago or whatever. But yeah, that was our first female state officer. And she told me that and just laughed about it. But that was it's 45 years ago, but a female traveling by themselves after dark and was a huge deal at
18,
that
yeah,
time.
very.
And so that those 2 stories have kind of always stuck with me out of all the historical stuff. There's plenty more, but you don't have all day. So
You have to read the book. You have to get the book and
you
read the book.
need buy the book and you can read them
Yeah.
all.
We need to have another conversation about that, really. This could be a standalone podcast, I think, just about some incredible history stories because there's so many. So I hope local chapters hear that charge. How can you preserve your history and
Absolutely.
special? So we've talked about the past. Let's talk about the future. When you look at the next 10 years and think about Kentucky FFA, our mission, what's coming down the pipe, what makes you excited?
Well, I think lots of things make me excited. We have some great teachers. We are set up in so many ways. Our membership's at an all-time high. I think we're set up in so many ways with the work the foundation is doing, the work of different groups within our teachers group, all those different pieces. I think we have an awful lot of things lining up to be in a really good spot with Kentucky. I think what excites me is just that we get to continue to grow, doing what we've always done, but doing it better, doing it more effectively. The 3-circle model. How do we expand that to other audiences? There's an awful lot of interest in agriculture from urban audiences. Everybody right now is concerned about their food and where their food comes from. We're having this national dialogue about food and food additives and all these pieces. And I think it sets agriculture and agricultural education up really well to be part of that conversation. So I'm looking forward to that. I think we get to hopefully have a front row seat to all that and to continue that growth. I'm excited about our 100th anniversary. Our 100th convention will be in 2029, and then our 100th anniversary is 2030. So we don't know how we're going to celebrate that right now, but we got to figure that out. But I'm excited about that. And I think that 100th anniversary gives you a chance as an organization to say, here's where we've been, here's where we're going, and hopefully really set the vision for the next 20 or 30 years. I'm old enough to remember when, there were still some materials laying around Rockcastle High School when I was there about what FFA would look like in 2000 and Vision 2000, and then it was Vision 2020, and now we're looking at 2030 is not far away, in 2040, and so yeah, those I think are exciting to look at how we grow and how we continue to do leadership development better than anybody else, how we continue to do work-based learning better than anybody else. How do we continue to have great classrooms where students are engaged and involved? I know there's going to be challenges, but there were challenges in the 30s and 40s. There were challenges in the 80s and 90s. There's going to be challenges in the 2030s and 2040s. So we just got to figure out as a profession how we deal with those. But we've got the people and the skills and the resources to do that. So I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah. It is exciting. I can't believe the centennial is quickly approaching, and I hope everyone stays tuned for what's in the works for that. Mr. Chaliff, we always ask our guests the same 3 questions. You know this as a listener of the podcast yourself. I hope you've been thinking about your answers for these. The first question we always like to ask is just, what's the best piece of leadership advice you've ever been given?
I think the best piece of leadership advice I've ever gotten, Jim Cox was my neighbor, bus driver, high school assistant principal, and then I worked for him at his family's hardware store. And sometime probably after I was out of college, even, I was with him one day and he was talking about something. And he said, a lot of times it's better to be happy than right. And he went on to tell this story about his wife having a convertible and how it was dumb that she had a convertible. He had told her it was dumb and all the reasons. But at the end of the day, Martha wanted a convertible. And Jim said, a lot of times it's better to be happy than right. And he said, not always. Sometimes you need to take a stand and be right. But a lot of times it's better to be happy than right. And within the last 6 months, I read a quote from Lou Holtz that said, if you have 90% of what you want, you might ought to take that and run with it. And so I think, to me, that figuring out there are some things that you need to fight for. And there are other things where you need to say, okay, I can live with this. And so, I may not like everything exactly like it is, but is the core of it right? Are we doing the right thing for the right reason? And I think in leadership and on an officer team, sometimes you need to just, for a chapter officer, if you don't like the color of the t-shirt, you know what? Probably, can you live with it? Okay, that's probably not willing to have a fight about. Now, are state officers going to wear official dress to state convention? The answer is yes. As long as I'm here, that's going to happen. But if I don't like the color of the t-shirt, you know what? I can live with it. And I think a lot of people would be a lot happier if they knew that and had heard that. So
That's good.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, the Kentucky FFA Foundation for Philanthropy, all about giving back time, talent, and treasure. You do that in so many ways, Mr. Chaliff, but who is one person that you would like to shout out for pouring into you?
Well, I don't know anybody that's had more friends and mentors and people pour into them than I have. So I apologize to the about 300 people I'm not mentioning here. But I'm going to go with maybe an easy answer, but my high school ag teacher, Jeff Hayes. And I had really good, all 3 of my teachers were really good. First time I met Mr. Hayes in August of 1994, the first words he said to me were, Matt, I think we can win that public speaking contest this year. And here I am 30 years later. Mr. Hayes is still pushing me to be better. He's still helping me. He's still saying, what do you need? How can I help you? But also, a compliment from him means more than a compliment from anybody. If he ever says, I don't like what you did, or I think you should have done something different, that hurts more than probably from anybody else. And so he's just been somebody who has consistently done that. He helped me get into UK. He helped me get a job at UK. He literally, this is before GPS, but before I moved over there, he literally took me and we drove from the UK dairy where I was going to live to campus so I could write down the directions and knew how to get there. Gosh, who does that kind of thing? And of course, the answer is all kinds of ag teachers do that kind of stuff for students, but Mr. Hayes went above and beyond for me 30 years ago, and he's going above and beyond for me still today. So I have to use him.
No, that's so special and a really good story. Our last question is a little bit on a different path here, but what's just something you're loving right now, Mr. Chaliff, that's helping you continue to grow as a leader?
I'm going to give you 2 answers, and you can pick which one you want.
We'll allow 2. It's okay.
Well, I'm a history person, and so I've just finished a biography of Winston Churchill. And we know Churchill for his famous speeches and his words, and we shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, that stuff. But I think what people don't realize about Churchill is he spent the whole of the 1930s out of power and fussing and fuming and throwing a fit that they weren't ready if Germany invaded. They needed a better air force and all these things, but he just kept working behind the scenes and working to make that happen. But then when war came and they called on Churchill, probably him and his resolve and his leadership is honestly the only reason that Hitler did not conquer all of Europe. And if Hitler conquered all of Europe, we very well might have made a treaty with Europe with Hitler, and the world might be a very, very different place today than it was then. And so that's just been a reminder to me of how much one person matters, and how much, even if you're not at the forefront, but you can make a lot of difference behind the scenes and in doing that. So that's been an inspiration. My other answer, again, you can use whichever one you want, and this may be too cheesy, but it's been this podcast. This podcast all year, I've listened to it, and I've listened to almost every episode. I've got a few I've got to go back and catch up on. But it's been, getting to hear different people and their stories. But I think one thing that's jumped out at me is how much the people on this podcast, and I know most of them, but how much they just are who they are, and they lean into being themselves and their strengths. And if you think about the early ones, Caroline Groth and Tony Myers and Jonathan Shell, those three people are all very much, they are who they are. They don't apologize for that. But their strength is not that they fit in a box. It's that they have reimagined the box, and they, are their own person, and use their strengths to serve different groups in different ways. And so as I've listened to different people, Nick Carter and Casey Montgomery, and you could just go on and on down the list all year long, that's been a recurring theme to me. And so I've really enjoyed that and appreciated getting to know those people and hear their stories. But being reinforced, to be successful, you just need to be yourself and be a really good version of yourself.
Oh, that is so kind. And I'm glad that it's been useful to you. Yeah, we've really enjoyed it too, getting to have a front row seat to those conversations.
Yeah.
It's been great. I had no concept of what the podcast would be, no concept of how y'all could make it work for a year, but it's been so good. And I hope you all are really proud of it and real happy of it, because I just don't know how it can be much better.
Oh, well, like you said, Mr. Hayes is a person for you that his compliments and his critiques mean more. You are that person for me too, and have been for a long time. And we get to work so closely together as well. It's just such a blessing, and people need to know you keep the wheels on the bus for all of us. And you said that reimagining the box. I love that. I think we have over Kentucky FFA. We've reimagined a lot of boxes, but at the end of the day, I think a strength for you is going like, okay, this box looks different. How are we still going to make this work and go, and giving things legs and wheels and structure? That's so much of your strength that we couldn't do without you. And your work inspires us all the time. So we'll have you on next year to talk about more history and what's going to happen.
Blessed to work with some great people.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the theme of it all. I've just been surrounded by good people. I mentioned Gary Burdine, but who has a student teacher supervisor they still talk to, and Mr. Evans, and I could just go on down the line, like this is hopefully not going to go on, but who has mentors for 30 years? Basically nobody.
Yeah.
But we get to do that. That's really cool. Like that's neat to do that. So
yeah, FFA and AGA do give you that.
Yeah.
They give you a lifetime of mentors, and it's so valuable. So,
sure.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you all.
And thank you all for listening to another episode of Growing Kentucky's Leaders. Growing Kentucky's Leaders is a podcast brought to you by the Kentucky FFA Foundation. Our music is performed by Bourbon County FFA member Joe Fritch. Artwork is by Julie Fritch Creative. Your hosts are Sheldon McKinney and Ruth Ann Fink, and you can find us on all social platforms at Kentucky FFA.